Chapter 13 of Abraham Lincoln, A History, Volume 4. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Abraham Lincoln, A History, Volume 4 by John Hay and John George Nicolay. Chapter 13. The Confederate Military League. It was constantly assumed that secession was a movement of the entire South. The fallacy of this assumption becomes apparent when we remember the time required for the full organization and development of the rebellion. From the 12th of October, when Governor Gist issued his proclamation convening the South Carolina legislature to inaugurate secession, to January 26, when Louisiana passed her secession ordinance, is a period of 3.5 months. In this first period, as it may be called, only the 6 Cotton States reached a positive attitude of insurrection, and they, as is believed, by less than a majority of their citizens. Texas, the 7th, did not finally join them till a week later. During all this time, the 8 remaining slave states, with certainly as good a claim to be considered the voice of the South, earnestly advised and protested against the precipitate and dangerous step. But secession had its active partisans in them. As in the Cotton States, their several capitals were the natural centers of disunion, and with few exceptions, their state officials held radical opinions on the slavery question. With the gradual progress of insurrection, therefore, in the extreme South, 4 of the interior slave states gravitated into secession. The change was very gradual, perhaps because a majority of their people wished to remain in the Union, and it was necessary to wait until, by slow degrees, the public opinion could be overcome. The anomalous condition and course of Virginia have already been described. Its Union vote in January, the apparently overwhelming Union majority of its convention, its vacillating and contradictory votes during February and March, and its sudden plunge into a secession ordinance and a military league with Jefferson Davis immediately after the Sumter bombardment. The whole development of the change is explained when we remember that Richmond had been one of the chief centers of secession conspiracy since the Fremont and Buchanan campaign of 1856. In the other interior slave states, the secession movement underwent various forms according to the greater obstacles which its advocates encountered. North Carolina, it will be remembered, gave a discouraging answer to the first proposal, and the earliest demonstrations of the conspiracy elicited no popular response. On the 9th and 10th of January, an immature combination of state troops and citizens seized Forts Johnston and Caswell, but the governor immediately ordered their restoration to the Federal authorities. The governor excused the hostile act by alleging the popular apprehension that Federal garrisons were to be placed in them, and earnestly deprecated any show of coercion. He received a conciliatory response from the War Department that no occupation of them was intended unless they should be threatened. Nevertheless, conspiracy continued, and as usual under the guise of solicitude for peace, and in a constant clamor for additional guarantees, the revolutionary feeling was augmented little by little. There seems to have been great fluctuation of public opinion. A convention was ordered by the legislature and subsequently voted down at the polls. Commissioners were sent to the Peace Convention at Washington and also to the Provisional Rebel Congress at Montgomery, with instructions limiting their powers to an effort at mediation. At the same time, the North Carolina House passed a unanimous resolution that if reconciliation failed, North Carolina must go with the slave states. Next, a military bill was passed to reorganize the militia and arm 10,000 volunteers. In reality, it seems to have been the same struggle which took place elsewhere, the state officials and radical politicians favoring secession and the people clinging to the Union, but yielding finally to the arts and intrigues of their leaders. When Sumter was bombarded and President Lincoln called for troops, the governor threw his whole influence and authority into the insurrectionary movement. He sent an insulting refusal to Washington, and the next day ordered his state troops to seize Forts Caswell and Johnston. A week later, April 22, he seized the Fayetteville arsenal, containing 37,000 stands of arms, 3,000 kegs of powder, and an immense supply of shells and shot. We may also infer that he was in secret league with the Montgomery Rebellion, for the rebel Secretary of War made a requisition upon him, and he at once placed his whole military preparation at the service of Jefferson Davis, sending troops and arms to Richmond and elsewhere. It was a bold usurpation of executive power. Neither legislature nor convention had ordered rebellion, but from that time on the state was arrayed in active hostility to the Union. It was not till the 1st of May that the legislature for the second time ordered a convention, which met and passed an ordinance of secession on the 20th of that month, also formally accepting the Confederate States Constitution. In the state of Arkansas, the approaches to secession were even slower and more difficult than in North Carolina. There seems to have been little disposition at first among her people or leaders to embark in the disastrous undertaking. The movement appears to have begun when, on December 20, 1860, a commissioner came from Alabama and by an address to the legislature invited Arkansas to unite in the scheme for separation. No direct success followed the request, and the deceitful expedient of a convention to ascertain the will of the people was resorted to. All parties joined in this measure, the fire eaters to promote secession, the Unionists to thwart it. An election for or against a convention took place February 18, 1861, resulting in 27,412 votes for and 15,826 votes against it, though as compared with the presidential election, it was estimated that at least 10,815 voters did not go to the polls. At a later election for delegates, the returns indicated a Union vote of 23,626 against a secession vote of 17,927. When the convention was organized, March 4, 1861, the delegates are reported to have chosen Union officers by a majority of 6. Many of the delegates must have already betrayed their constituents by a change of front. Revolutionary tricks had been employed. The United States arsenal at Little Rock had been seized February 8, and the ordnance stores at Napoleon February 12, while no doubt the insurrectionary influences from the neighboring Cotton States were indefinitely multiplied. With all this, the progress of the conspirators was not rapid. A conditional secession ordinance was voted down by the convention 39 to 35. This ought to have effectually killed the movement, but it shows the greater aggressiveness and persistence of the secession leaders, that instead of yielding to defeat, they kept alive their scheme by the insidious proposal to take a new popular vote on the question in the following August. Meanwhile, there were a continual loss of Union sentiment and growth of secession excitement. And as in other states, when the Sumter catastrophe occurred, the governor and his followers placed the state in an attitude of insurrection by the refusal to comply with Lincoln's call for troops and by hostile military organization. Thereafter, disunion had a free course. The convention was hastily called together April 20, and meeting on the 6th of May, immediately passed the customary ordinance of secession. In no other state did secession resort to such methods of usurpation as in Tennessee. The secession faction of the state was insignificant in numbers, but its audacity was perhaps not equaled in any other locality, and it may almost be said that Governor Isham G. Harris carried the state into rebellion single-handed. The whole range of his plottings cannot, of course, be known. He called a session of the legislature January 7, 1861, and sent them a highly inflammatory message. A convention bill was passed and approved January 19, which submitted the question of convention or no convention, and which also provided that any ordinance of disunion should be ratified by popular vote before taking effect. At the election held on February 9, there appeared on the vote for delegates a Union majority of 64,114, and against holding the convention a majority of 11,875. This overwhelming popular decision for a time silenced the conspirators. The fall of Fort Sumter and Lincoln's call for troops afforded the governor a new pretext to continue his efforts. He sent the President a defiant refusal and responded to a requisition from Montgomery for troops, being no doubt under secret promises to the rebellion. In the revolutionary excitement which immediately followed, the governor's official authority and the industrious local conspiracy of which he was the head carried all before them. Since it was evident that he could not obtain a convention to do his bidding, he resolved to employ the legislature, which he once more called together. In secret sessions, he was able to manipulate it at his will. On the 1st of May, the legislature passed a joint resolution directing the governor to appoint commissioners to enter into a military league with the authorities of the Confederate States, placing the whole force of the state at the control of Jefferson Davis, and on the 7th of the month, a formal military league or treaty to this effect was signed. Even after this, the governor had difficult work. Eastern Tennessee was pervaded by so strong a Union sentiment that it continued to labor and protest against being dragged into rebellion contrary to its will. But the opposition was of little direct avail. Military organization had its grasp on the whole state, and citizens not in arms had no choice but to submit to the orders issued from Montgomery and Nashville. It will be seen from this recital that the secession movement divides itself into two distinct periods. The first group, the Cotton States, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida, and Texas, took action mainly between the 12th of October, 1860, and February 4, 1861, a period of little more than 3.5 months. The second group, the interior slave states, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas, was occupied by the struggle about 3 months longer, or a total of 6 months after Lincoln's election. So also these two periods exhibited separate characteristics in their formative processes. The first group, being more thoroughly permeated by the spirit of revolt and acting with greater vigor and promptness, shows us the semblance at least of voluntary confederation through its provisional Congress at Montgomery. On the other hand, the action of the four interior slave states was, in each case, with more or less distinctness, at first merely that of joining the original nucleus in a military league, in which the excitement of military preparation and allurement of military glory, not the consideration of political expediency, turned the scale. There remained still the third group, consisting of the border slave states of Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri. The efforts of the conspirators to involve Maryland in secession have already been detailed, as well as the persistence they employed to gain control of Kentucky and Missouri. In these states, the attempt failed because of the direct and indirect military support which the government was able to give immediately to the Union sentiment and organizations. Had it been possible to extend the same encouragement and help to Arkansas and Tennessee, they also might have been saved. This becomes more apparent when we remember how quickly half of Virginia was reclaimed and held steadfastly loyal during the war. The remaining slave state, Delaware, was so slightly tainted with treason that her attitude can scarcely be said to have been in doubt. Moreover, her geographical position threw her destiny inseparably with the free states. The adhesion which we have described of the four interior slave states of Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas to the Confederate States at once wholly changed the scope and strength of the rebellion. It extended its territorial area nearly 1/3 and almost doubled its population and resources. It could now claim to be a compact nation of 11 states with a territory more than double the size of any European nation except Russia, and with a population of 5.5 millions of whites and 3.5 millions of blacks. It had a long seacoast, several fine harbors, and many navigable rivers. It contained a great variety of lands, important diversities of climate, and a wide range of agricultural products. Its country was as yet sparsely inhabited, and was known to include very considerable mineral wealth, while its manufacturing capabilities were almost wholly untouched. The exultation and enthusiastic prophecies of the rebel chiefs at the successful beginning of their daring project were perhaps not unnatural when we reflect that their mischievous design and reprehensible cause had secured the support of such fair and substantial elements of national greatness and power. End of chapter 13.